Welcome to the 48th Annual Symposium on the American Indian. This session is titled Trauma from Dealing to Healing with keynote presentation, Dr. Darryl Tonemah, Kiowa, Comanche, and Tuscarora. Dr. Tonemah is with the Tonemah Consulting Group. And as you probably know, this session is one of many that are included in this year's virtual agenda. Please do take time to visit our website at nsuok.edu/symposium for more details regarding the agenda. All sessions will be recorded and made available in the coming weeks. This session is sponsored by the American Indian Resource Center's NetStar program and is being held in collaboration with our NSU College of Education. Dr. Tonemah has a PhD in counseling psychology and cultural studies, a master's degree in community counseling, and 3 bachelor's of science degrees. He has sat on numerous state and national boards addressing disparities in education and healthcare among the Native community, including the Oklahoma Cancer Network, the Cherokee Cancer Coalition, establishing the Oklahoma Intertribal Diabetes Coalition, establishing the Oklahoma Intertribal Cancer Coalition, the United National Intertribal Youth Diabetes Initiative. He has served on the ADA Board of Directors, as well as the Research Policy Committee and the Native American Initiatives Committee. He has an extensive work training hospitals, clinics, universities, corporations, and schools in the US and Canada on trauma and its relationship to behavior and health. He is the owner of the Tonemah Consulting Group, an organization dedicated to increasing wellness in Native communities. He also owns First Nations Telehealth Solutions, a company dedicated to increasing access to psychological and psychiatric care to Native communities via telemedicine, and is the president of the Native Legacy Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowerment programming and suicide prevention in Native communities. He has also recorded 11 award-winning CDs, published research, published a book entitled Spray Your Swamp Cooler. He has appeared in numerous films and stage productions. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Darryl Tonemah.
Thank you. Can I just jump in now? You know what's going to be awesome for me and making this talk really fun for me is that all my words are being transcribed at the bottom of the screen. So if I just start drooling and staring at the bottom of the stream, it's because my ADHD kicked in, and I'm just going to stare at that and just say random things and see how they're spelled. I'm doing it right now. I better quit. Thank you for having me. My name is Darryl Tonemah. I am Kiowa, Comanche, and Tuscarora. I live outside Niagara Falls in Western New York. I'm living here and staying here in Phoenix right now for the next couple months to follow the sun this year. I'm a psychologist. My PhD is in counseling psychology and cultural studies. And I am honored to have been asked to participate in this training, and I'm so excited to share this information with you guys. I'm excited about it because I had a shift in how I do my work. So I have a practice, and I see a couple folks in my office, and I see folks by telepsychology, mostly telepsychology. I see a few in my office there in New York. And my training is a cognitive behaviorism. I'm a cognitive behaviorist. You probably are too. Even if you're in education or medicine or just living your life, you probably do a lot of cognitive behaviorism, which is looking at an entity and understanding it and changing meanings for it for yourself. When you go to counseling, they kind of ask the questions that help you change meanings and approach your problems in different ways, in different light. If you go to the doctor, they probably say, oh, you have this, you need to take this pill, so you take this many a day, and that'll help this feel better. If you're in education, you probably say things like 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 2 = 4, and we memorize those things. That's cognitive work. You're teaching things over and over again, and people absorb it. What changed for me is that stress trauma isn't multiple trial learning, it is single trial learning. The body absorbs the trauma in a single time. It doesn't take multiple car accidents for you to be twitchy in a car, or to have PTSD, or if you're in combat, or if there's abuses. It doesn't take multiple of those. Unfortunately, there is multiple of those, but it doesn't take it for the body to say, this is a big deal. And so as I was doing my work over the past couple decades, I realized that the tools I was using wasn't matching the event. It seemed like I was having the same conversations over and over and over again, with the same people. They'd come in and we'd have a talk, and they'd leave feeling better or leave crying, and come back and we'd have the same similar conversation a week later, and then 6 months later, then a year later. It just seemed like we were having these same conversations. And I thought, maybe I'm just not very good at this. But then I realized maybe I'm not using the right tool. So when I was looking at our communities, we're having these same conversations and the same maladies wherever we were. It could have been here in Arizona or New York or Navajo or Sioux. It could have been having these same conversations, and it was all these different native communities. And we were having high rates of everything you didn't want to have high rates of, from disease, cancers, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, arthritis, lupus, things like this. We're having so many of these spikes and these things. And that's not even discussing the social, the drinking, the abuses, the early deaths, things like this. And I thought, what the heck? Why does this group have so much of this stuff that we don't want to have? But the group right off the res, they don't have the disparity rates. Why is such the disparity? So my res at home is like a little 5 mile by 5 mile res. And there's Lewiston and Niagara Falls and Sanborn in Buffalo and all these areas around here. And here's my little res that time forgot. And why do we have such higher rates than this and this and this? We're sharing the same air, largely the same land base. Why? And so I started looking into that, and I kept coming back to that word trauma. And I didn't want it to be trauma, because I thought maybe it's the water and we could just get a Brita filter and everybody will be better. But it wasn't that. It kept coming back to something unique happened to this group located here that didn't happen here, 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 that created disparity in so many areas. And it kept going back to that word trauma. And so I wanted to learn about it. I wanted to know what it was. And honestly, I wasn't even sure that I had the tools necessary to move the needle. So I wanted to find out more about it and how it operated, and how do we diffuse that? And I've had a lot of people say to me, this is how it's always been. This is how it's always going to be. And they're basing the future on previous information. So maybe if they're a teenager, or even if they're 50 years old, yes, it's been this way. And maybe that fire was lit at a young age. And so it has always been that way. But what we've come to know and understand about how trauma works and the tools for trauma, it doesn't always have to be that way. And there's hope in that. And there's positivity, there's sovereignty in that. And what I get to do and what I want to do, my goal is, if there's a person I'm talking with, is I want them to have sovereign moments. So when you think about sovereignty in a community perspective, we are in charge of ceremony and language and finances and government. That's a sovereign in the community in a more of a sociological perspective and a macro perspective. Sovereignty in a micro perspective in me is my capacity to just control a physiological response, which controls a thought, which controls a behavior in this moment. Having a different menu of options, responding instead of reacting. That all pairs down to Can I even control my heart rate and this tingling sensation in my body getting hot in this moment? Because that feeds everything else. Once I start becoming sovereign over those, I'm able to make better decisions. I'm able to become more autonomous in my life. Maybe have more agency in my own life. And then we can spread that out to our family, into our clan, into our tribe, into our community. That's what we want to see happen. And it's happening. I'm having these same conversations across the country, and people are leaning into this, and it's awesome. It's a beautiful thing to see Native people tapping into their own sovereignty, which changes our communities. Come on. Doggone it. I'm gonna get excited. I'll clear afternoon. We're gonna talk all day long. Come on now. So today, I started diving into the research. I wanted to know what all is going on here. Why am I having the same conversation? And then I came to find out that my tools weren't matching the event. So I looked at the work of Peter Levine, Somatic Experience. He's out of Colorado. Bessel van Kolk, a neurologist. Gabor Mate, a neurologist. Gabor Mate is a physician. Robert Scare, a neurologist. Dan Siegel, a neurologist. And come to find out, all these guys from all these different places around the world were saying the same thing. That to do trauma work, it's bottom up, not top down. What does that mean? There's a couple ways of looking at that. The bottom up meaning the information our body gives us and how we're labeling this information. My heart pounding, I'm going to call that stress or anxiety or anger or frustration. I'm hot, my breathing shallow, I'm calling that anxiety. We're labeling these things. So the bottom up, we get this information, then we label it. Or the bottom part of the brain here, which all of our survival is there. Not so much logic, it's all about survival there. And so we do more survival techniques than logic in our behaviors. If you know folks who have anxiety attacks, how many of you know folks who have anxiety attacks? This is an honor system, and I can't see any of you. So I'll assume about 80 to 90% of you are raising your hand right now. And in the middle of their anxiety attack, do you say, why don't you just calm down? You ever thought about just calming down? That doesn't work, does it? Because you're using a logic tool for a physiological somatic event. And when you say, why don't you just calm down? The assumption is that they chose it. That, I think I'm in the Walmart parking lot. I think I'm going to have an anxiety attack right now, just for the fun of it. I'm driving down the road. Hey, I'm going to bust out an anxiety attack. They're not choosing that. The survival centers of the brain and the body who have been triggered, been wired for survival, wake up because it picks up on something that says, we need to survive this. So their body feels like it's running or fighting, but they're in a movie theater and it doesn't make sense. And so many of my patients will say things like, I don't know, I can't figure it out. I guess I'm just crazy. That's not right. You're not crazy or ruined or broken. It's just you've been built for survival. Because of something that occurred, and we might even know what that is. Something's occurred that your body says, I need to survive this if it ever pops up again. Something even similar to it pops up again. I need to survive this. And so it gives every tool for survival. And we're to the season now where we say, God bless it. Thank you for getting me to this point in my life. I've survived this far, but now I'm ready to thrive. And I'm ready to become sovereign. And that's where we are in the season now. We know what the research says. The guys I had mentioned, they all have amazing textbooks that I want you guys to pick up because we can keep having these conversations and moving our communities forward. Come on now. So what I wanted to do was learn what it was and how it behaved, and paring it down to that. And the more I learned and got trained on and researched, the more I learned it's a rogue electrical charge. So let's agree, for the sake of harmony, that our body is electrical, right? Everyone nod for me right now. That's electricity. You think about how amazing we are put together. A neurochemical impulse, wired, control the muscle in my neck, and I did this. That's pretty amazing. Move my fingers, same deal. Wiggle my toes, same deal. So I have a little thing here. So we are electrical. Agreed? This needs electricity to work. I'll provide that. Here we go. Come on. There you go. That's me. All me. Still me. It needs electricity. And if I was there with you guys, I'd have you touch that end and we touch fingers and it would light up again because that electricity just bounces around and we're just conduits of electricity. Now that rogue electricity, it shifts during trauma, during an overwhelm moment. Now, if you want one of these to work with your students or your patients yourself, there's, I think they have one of an Tahlequah. Maybe not though. There's a, like a scientific warehouse for these things called Cracker Barrel, $7. Okay. Point being though, we have this charge. Now, right now, that charge is going where it needs to go right now. It's going to my hippocampus for this information, saying, hey, let me pull this forward. It's using my logic and language. A little bit of stress, but not too much, enough to keep me upright and active. It's keeping my my adrenal gland flowing, my pancreas, making me breathe, making my heartbeat. It's doing things on by itself that I'm not making it do. I'm not consciously putting effort into that. It's just doing it on its own. But when a big moment is occurring, a survival moment, it could be an abuse, it could be defending yourself, it could be a car accident, a dog attack, a divorce, a separation, things that are kind of overwhelming. This charge goes to our survival centers of our brain, which are, there's a brain here, way in the back here. Way in the back here. Isn't it amazing what I have on my desk here? I have my electronic thing, I got a brain, I got a frog, piece of chicken. So this brain here, it goes back here to the survival centers of the brain to make sure that you make it through this moment. To make sure that you make it through this moment. So it gets you in fight or flight mode. And if you use it up, then it did its job. It did what it was supposed to do. But let's say we didn't use it. We froze. Fight, flight, or freeze. We didn't use it to run away. We didn't use it to fight back. We froze. We weren't able to. And maybe in an abuse situation, we aren't able to fight back. A car accident, seeing abuse in the home, watching parents fight, and you're just a kid. And so we freeze. And so that charge, which lights up the autonomic system, the sympathetic system, to make sure that we survive, it lights that up, but we don't use it. And so the brain, our physiology changes. The stress centers of the brain light up and swell up. fMRI studies, more gray matter in the stress centers of the brain, less gray matter in the logic and language centers of the brain. And then it just takes laps because we didn't use it. And so it just takes laps. And every time something even close to the original trauma comes up, the autonomic system says, we haven't used this up yet, and you must be storing it for some reason. So here it is again. But it looks like an anxiety attack because there's nothing happening that would logically make sense. But the amygdala, a little bit bigger than this guy right here. The amygdala, one of its jobs, one of the many jobs, is for it to remember stresses and traumas. And here's a big phrase that we need to remember is when the amygdala picks up on something kind of even remotely close to the original trauma. Maybe somebody's wearing the same cologne as an abuser. Maybe a car, if you're in the car and you're in a car accident previously and it shakes a little bit. The amygdala remembers that. And here's our big phrase. It takes the body back to the same sensations as when the original trauma occurred, Peter Levine. It takes the body back to the same sensations as when the original trauma occurred for the purposes of finishing, to finish. Because it marked it and said, this is just like that. And you keep running away, you keep avoiding it, you avoid, you avoid, you avoid. You eat, you drink, you hate, you smoke, you use. We try to use external tools for an internal event. And that internal event is very uncomfortable, and maybe we haven't developed the tools. Maybe we haven't been raised with those tools. So we try to find something outside of us to make inside feel good again. So we moved to New York. I taught at OU for a while. I was faculty at the Health Sciences Center, ran a program down on the main campus. And then 11 years ago next month, golly, our house was hit by a tornado in Norman. Destroyed the house. We couldn't, it was inhabitable. And so we ended up moving back to New York. And there are 4 horsemen of trauma. If you don't use up that charge, it can show up in 4 different ways. Hyperarousal, which looks like ADHD, constriction, which is tightening, dissociation, and numbing, where we don't know how to feel, we can't feel, we even have numb locations on our body. And during the tornado, I was out running around like a good Oklahoman. Tornado sirens go off. So I went outside to see where the tornado was. So I walked outside, and it was, come to find out, it was in my driveway. And so I ran inside, and it was trying to pick me up, and I was fighting, fight or flight. I was using that charge the way it was supposed to be used for the purposes of survival. But my family, my wife and kids, were under the stairs like this, not using fight, not using flight, but freeze. And trauma is in the freeze. Trauma is in the freeze. The inability to use that charge for what it was intended for. So it kind of settled into my family. My wife has poor recollection of the event because the amygdala says, I can't give you all this information because if I did, it'd be too much. At best, it's spotty. My daughter, Gracie, was a constrictor, like this. You can tell a constrictor by the way they walk. They're tight. There's less fluidity in their muscles because they're waiting for impact. My son Parks was hyperarousal. It looks like ADHD. It just bouncing off the walls, talking all the time. Maybe they have less ability to regulate body temperature. Their tags drive them crazy. And thankfully, blessedly, we have largely gotten rid of those symptoms. And that's what they are, symptoms of something different. So let's take care of the something different that is not having them feel uncomfortable. So Parks, we left and moved back to New York, where I was born. And we had to go to, just a couple months before we left, Parks, my son, we used to jump back and forth from the chair to the footstool. I know it's not called a footstool, you fancy folks. Ottoman. He used to jump from the chair to the ottoman. He was like 2 years old, a little monkey. And he would just jump, and then he'd push it further out, and then he'd jump. Just so you know, he hasn't changed. He still does stuff like that. Then he'll push it further and push it further. But he was 2 years old, and one time he didn't make it. And so I had to take him to the ER. First of all, where's the parents during this time? Come on, people. So I had to take him during the ER, to the ER there in Norman, and they had to x-ray him and everything. They were going to put a cast on. They said he broke his wrist. And they said, Dad, will you hold him down? And I said, okay. And so I hold him down, and he is just screaming and crying and looking at me like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Just crying, 2 years old. And then they put the cast on, and he just collapses like that. So fast forward 6 months, we're in New York now, and I have to take him to the doctor. And like a well child checkup or something like that. So I take him to the doctor, and they actually give him a shot. And guess what the doctor said? Dad, will you please hold him down? His amygdala says, this is just like what had happened before. And he starts freaking out, screaming, just like before. It took me and the doctor and 2 nurses to give him a shot. I was like, just let him have the measles. I don't care. And so they finally give him a shot. Then he collapses again. So fast forward a couple more months. I don't know, for some reason I had to take him back for another shot. I don't remember. I know he had to get a shot. But as we're driving up the road to the clinic, he starts freaking out. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to. He's probably like 2.5 years old. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. He's screaming, freaking out, sweating. And he's like, I don't want to go. He's just screaming it. We pull in the parking lot, and he is on full go mode. He is hulking out. He's green. His pants are torn at the bottom. He's, I don't want to go. And so I get out of the car. I gotta take my boy. I get out of the car and I can close the truck door and I can hear him. And then I walk around and I open the door and he's full blown. And I said, you want to run? And he's like, ah! And he jumps out of the car. And there's a big, long field by the clinic there, a few hundred yards long. And we get out, and me and my little 2.5-year-old son are just sprinting. And I know like people on the second floor are saying, what are them crazy Indians doing down there? And we're just sprinting across the parking lot. And pretty soon he slows down, thankfully. And then we stop. And I said, you ready to go back? And he said, I don't want to go. And I said, let's go. We took off running again. So we did, and then, and after about the 5th time, either we were going to go see his doctor or we're going to go see my doctor. So I'm like, should we go in? And he said, okay. And we go in. And he has to get a shot. But guess what? Nothing. Nothing. He hasn't been afraid of shots since then. Hasn't been afraid of the doctor since then. He got rid of it. In the initial moment, he wanted to fight or flight. But I was holding him and I didn't give him that chance. So being daddy bear, I knew that what was connected to that. So I said, let's run. And his body said, this is what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting to finish. This is what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting to finish. Now, trauma responses, what we call a trauma response, heart pounding, pupil dilation, breathing shallow, hot, tingly arms and legs. It's the body trying to finish. It just hasn't had the opportunity to finish. Now, we don't have to know the big event to have them sprint across parking lots, things like that. We can start creating opportunities for our people to become stress hardy, stress resilient, sovereign. We can help them develop tools, internal tools for internal events, not external tools for internal events. We can help them have sovereign moments, that they start stacking sovereign moments after sovereign moments after sovereign moments. Because trauma, that overwhelm of this thing right here, the feeling of overwhelm, is stored in our body for the purposes of survival. And we have to use our tools and give it permission to say, well, we can be done with this. And many of the tools that I'll get to talk about in this afternoon session are not, let me ask the $1 million question. Let me ask the question that's going to change your life, because you know what? It doesn't exist. The thing that I say isn't going to exist. What I have seen in my practice over the years is creating a sense of autonomy, of agency, where they have, the body bears the burden. And it's holding on to it for the purposes of survival. It's overwhelm stored in our body. It's stored in our body for the purposes of survival. So until it can be released, be used, it can become a lifestyle. Trauma is a lifestyle of anger, of reaction, not response, but reaction. Hypervigilance, which is, we are normally vigilant. The survival centers of our brain are just normally vigilant, making sure that we're okay, scanning things, looking around, making sure the world's all good. Okay. So that's kind of scanning. Like hypervigilance is whoa, 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 whoa. Everything becomes a danger. Sounds become louder. Because in hypervigilance, there's so many threats in the world. We got to make sure that we're going to survive this threat. And it's not a conscious process. So just and self-medication becomes a lifestyle of anger, reaction, hypervigilance, self-medication. The self-medication doesn't have to be allopathic. It could be drinking, hitting, smoking, using, something that helps diffuse this just for a second. But we can switch that. We can help people turn the corner on that. So just a quick, I mean, if we had all day long, then I would dive into the deep end of brain function and things, but I'll just do a larger 30,000 foot view. So here's our brain again. Okay. So up here's logic. Okay. The prefrontal. Okay. It is my executive functioning. And over here on this left side is my language. Is going to be Broca's region, how I form words, Wernicke's region, how I comprehend language, all that stuff is here. And my trauma response is all way back here. This is all back here. So look at, this is miles away brain-wise, but we keep using this tool, the logic and language tools. But if we did an fMR study, we'd see that logic and language are pretty much gone. And back here looks like a lightning storm. So the tool doesn't match the event. And this is a sensation center of the brain. So we just have to work with sensation. There's all sorts of research. Schachter's work, I think it's Lang's team. Several different teams have found that we have the sensation base first, goes up the neurons in the neck to the thalamus. The thalamus is basically the gatekeeper of the brain. It takes the information from the body and says, well, what do we do with this? And then if there has been a lot of traumas, the thalamus sends it to the prefrontal, the logic center of the brain, the Watchtower in Vanderkolk's words, the Watchtower, which says, well, no, we're not in the middle of a fight. We're at an OU game and we're up 74-0. So it's excitement. It's not anger or frustration or fear. It's excitement. And we say, oh, okay, we put up our hands in the air. Like we don't care. But if we have a lot of traumas, or if we had things that have happened, the thalamus just opens up wide. It says, I'm taking this information and I'm letting everything in. I'm not discerning anything. I'm sending it to the amygdala, which is the smoke alarm of the brain. Again, Besselbud, Vanderkolk stuff. It's the smoke alarm of the brain, which is survive, survive, survive the fire, survive the fire. So even though we're at OU's game and it's 74-0, and we're like this, we're having an anxiety attack. Because the amygdala says, I don't know what this is, but I need to survive this. And in our schools, this can look a lot like ADHD. It makes it just about impossible to learn. It makes it just about impossible to read, to sit still. So, but what we're doing is we are saying, here's all the symptoms from my smart DSM book. It'll say, these are the symptoms and this is what it is, but it doesn't talk about causality. So what we want to do is help people start stacking sovereign moments using tools other than chaos. And what I've noticed from the folks that I work with that I'm doing trauma work with, and they start having victories. They start stacking their sovereign moments. And I'll ask them, what does that feel like? and they'll say, well, my heart's not beating fast, and I don't feel tingly, and my stomach doesn't feel churning, and I'm not hot. So they're describing, they're leaning into wellness as lack of symptoms. Whereas someone who doesn't have those traumas will say, I feel calm, or I feel at peace. So I have to tell these folks, let's call that peace. Because if you're living this way, it's not this, it's not this, you're perpetually waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're waiting for it to happen again. But part of the shift in thought, the zeitgeist is, let's pursue peace and wellness rather than avoid these things. That seems semantic, but it's a very big shift in thought. I'm in the middle of pursuit of peace, and me having this moment right now is peace. And I've had so many people say, I've never felt like this before. Because if they've grown up with it, this is a different experience. And then I have to teach them, let's call that peace. And they just get a smile on their face like, this is peace. And it is a beautiful moment to have somebody discover that. It's an amazing thing. So we learn a lot from our nervous system and from the animal kingdom. There's a cool book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Sapolsky. So a zebra is in the outback or wherever zebras live. I'm not a zebraologist, but I'll say the outback, not the steakhouse, the outback, wherever the outback is. I think it's on Standing Rock somewhere. And they're all eating, all these zebras are eating, but there's a lion in the tall grass, a lion. And it says, ooh, I want that one right there. That one looks delish. And so it jumps up and grabs the zebra that it wants, puts his paws on his haunches and takes to the side of it, and then drags the zebra back to the tall grass. And just like you, just like me, the zebra has three options: fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze. It can't fight because it's already in the lion's mouth. It can't flight because it's already in the lion's mouth. Freeze. Freeze. Endorphin rush. It looks like a dead zebra. You can't feel pain. Heart's barely beating. It just looks like a dead zebra. And so the lion's getting ready to eat, but you know what lions are. They got such big egos. You saw Lion King. The lion says, I don't eat dead stuff. I am the king of the outback. So I eat things that are in my mouth fighting still. That's what I do because I'm a lion and I have this big ego. Okay, so the lion lets go. And the scanning centers, the survival centers of the zebra's brain wake him up and say, he let go. Let's get out of here. And so the zebra jumps up. You can YouTube this stuff. And runs back to the herd. Now here's our lesson for us. Runs back to the herd. The herd opens up for the wounded zebra. The zebra walks in, and the whole herd surrounds the zebra. The zebra walks to where it is safest to heal. Man, the zebra walks to where it is safest for the purpose of healing, and the community surrounds and allows the opportunity for healing, because we don't heal until we are safe. Otherwise, it's required of the brain and the body to stay in defense mode because we aren't safe. The person isn't safe, so it's required for them to stay in defense mode. So they surround, and the zebra goes in the middle. And here's what's really interesting is the zebra shakes. The zebra shakes 45 seconds to a minute, and then it stops. And then it stops. And then it's done. It's healed. The animal kingdom can't live with trauma. Animal can't survive with trauma. So it finishes right away, and it starts doing zebra stuff, hanging out at the watering hole with the water buffalo. It doesn't start chain smoking. It doesn't start drinking. It starts abusing. Humans, our biggest barrier is our logic center when it comes to surviving trauma, because we try to make sense of it. We say things like, I don't understand. I feel crazy, because we're trying to make sense of it. It doesn't live in the logic part of the brain. It lives in the survival part of the brain. So hear me say this. It's more of a physiological, trauma is much more of a physiological event than a psychological event. Once we can harness the physiological, the psychological can come online. And then we can work on those tools. But until we have this, they're always on survival mode until we can deflate this. If we could have thought our way out of it, we would have by now. I'm saying it again, it sounds smart. If we could have thought our way out of it, we would have by now. It's not even so much a matter of knowing what the event was. People from Vietnam know what they saw and know what they did. And they woke up last night screaming. The folks I work with maybe were abused as children, but still are having anxiety attacks in the Walmart parking lot. They knew what happened. And they tried to think their way through it, but they were still having the same responses. What we want to do is help create empowerment, possibility, sovereignty for these folks, using the tools that match the event. Because until then, these maladaptive behaviors, the drinking, the hitting, the smoking, the using, the things that we see in disparity in many of our communities, are really present to try to mediate a sense of overwhelm. They're there to, I want to feel better just for right now, just for this second. I want to come up for air just for a second. And once they come up for air, they go back down. Because you know that the addictive behaviors just lead to more and more problems and more traumas. So they're spending their lives trying to mediate this sense of overwhelm with external tools because of the event. Now, here's another big phrase. The event is over. The trauma is in me. The event is over. It's not occurring right now. And really, if it's become active in this moment, it's because I believe it's the lateral prefrontal cortex, which measures time, is dragging that past moment into the present. And it's not so much that they're remembering it, they're re-experiencing it, they're reliving it. And it's not in the logic parts of the brain. So they're having this re-experience, and it doesn't make sense. But their body bears the burden and says, I have it here for you again. I have it here for you again. The event is over. So when I'm working with folks, I make sure that we're updating the hippocampus throughout the session. I'll talk more about this afternoon. Updating the hippocampus throughout the session, making sure that they know they are present, that I am safe, that I'm using my prosody, that my language and presence is a calming, safe presence, so they have the opportunity to heal. Because it's much more about who I am being in that moment than what I am saying. And remember, the logic parts are off the table. So it's much more about who I am being than what I'm saying. So I'll make this slide available for you guys, because it's a cool slide. My friend Ann Bullock and I have talked about this many times, and there's a tree the root of the tree for this trauma is prenatal early life nutrition, poverty, prenatal substance abuse, child abuse, child neglect, poor quality of early life relationships, epigenetics. That's the root of this stuff. And then you climb it. And then the bigger branches are drug abuse, alcohol use, emotional responses, inability to self-regulate, overeating, and then the fruit that bears on that tree. If you follow those branches out, the fruit that bears, addictions, liver disease, alcoholism, violence, traumatized parenting, depression, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, teen pregnancies, dropout rates, high dropout rates. That's the fruit that bears. I'm gonna say something cool. You can have it tattooed if you want to, but give me credit for it. You're not going to change the fruit until you fix the root. Come on. You're not going to change the fruit until you fix the root. Creating better opportunity for early life nutrition, epigenetic change, safe environments for our kids, quality of early life relationships, eliminating child abuse, child neglect, creating stress-hardy children that grow up to be sovereign individuals, become leaders in our communities. You're not going to change the fruit till you fix the root. That's why it's such an honor for me to get into schools and get to work with young people to help them become more sovereign in these given moments, giving them tools. Because home may not change. Maybe mom and dad are just struggling and drinking, and maybe they don't have the capacity, but we can still teach tools that were practices in the classroom. Then I always say, if there's things that happen this weekend or tonight that are stressful at home, you have these tools. So go find a space, go to maybe lock yourself in the closet or the bathroom, or go for a walk, go to the backyard, find a space where you can use these tools for self-regulation. Teach your body self-regulation, The ability to self-regulate during novel events, during stressful events, is one of the greatest predictors of success. The ability to self-regulate during novel or stressful events is one of the greatest predictors of success. If we had, and you think about the truth of that statement, is think about it in your own life. We lean toward the things that make us feel good, and we lean away from the things that make us feel uncomfortable. And maybe going to college makes us feel uncomfortable, so we stop. Maybe we go to college, but it's uncomfortable for that first semester, so we go home. We never go back. That job, trying out for that team, those things have a level of somatic information that I don't know how to deal with, so I just avoid it. That's not sovereign. That's letting that have power over me instead of me being sovereign in this moment. So our challenge is to increase something I like to call somatic literacy. Somatic literacy, which is understanding the information my body gives me and not to be overwhelmed by it, but being able to harness it. Just say, my heart's pounding right now and I'm tingling and hot. And that's just information. I don't have to label it anything yet. It's just information. Sometimes those things come in handy. If I'm being if I'm being chased down the road on the res by a pack of dogs, then that's good information. No, I'm going to go with it. But if I'm feeling it randomly, it's information. And if I perpetually have felt this information and ran away, then that's what I've learned. That's my body has learned. And that takes away my autonomy. That takes away my sovereignty. But if I get this information and I lean to it, my body's I'm teaching it something different. I'm teaching it empowerment. I'm teaching it strength. I'm teaching it that I am in charge of this moment. I'm sovereign in this moment. So then our challenge finally, in the last couple of minutes here, is to learn otherwise. I learned all this stuff after college, actually, after I graduated years and years and years ago. But I had to learn that I needed other tools. I still have those tools, and they're valuable, they're wonderful. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. That's what I do. But I have these other tools because they align together well. So I had to learn otherwise, not right or wrong, just what else is out there that's going to help this person in front of me become sovereign. And that's really the bottom line. When I see somebody, they walk into my office or they pop up on the screen, I truly, from the bottom of my heart, want them to feel better. I do. You have to have that heart to begin with. And then we know we become educated in the tools that meet the event that's going on. And it may not be, let me ask you a million questions. It may not be the insight tool. And then I teach them tools that they can take home and use on a daily basis. A ton of empathy. Because again, it's not so much what I'm saying, but it's who I'm being. And the vagus nerve picks up on me, and am I safe? Am I okay? And am I connected? And the more I'm doing those things, the more healing, not just dealing, can occur. We have to recognize when they're overwhelmed, and know when to give the tools, know when to push the gas, know when to push the brake, and just kind of sense that about them. Like I said, this afternoon, we'll look at some different tools, but this morning, I wanted to tee it up and know that there's something different that we need to kind of start paying attention to and leaning into a little bit, because I have my 3 chocolate kidlets, Gracie, Parks, and Jack Jack, and I wouldn't want someone to take them from dealing, perpetually postponing, to healing and sovereignty and empowerment. So thank you, my friends, for your time and for your attention and for joining, and let's take care of each other.
Thank you, Dr. Tonemah. We really appreciate you being with us this afternoon, and do want to point out to our attendees that he does have another presentation today at 3 o'clock, so please come back and join us for it. I apologize that we are running short on time, so we won't be able to have a Q&A, but hopefully you can join again at 3 o'clock, and maybe we can get some questions in at that time. I do want to quickly mention before we end that we do have a link in the chat that we would like for everybody to complete. And for those that do complete it, will be entered into a drawing to win resources to help apply trauma-informed care practice in education. So please check that out, and just help us out and get in feedback as well. Again, thank you, Dr. Tonemah, and we look forward to seeing you later this afternoon.
Thank you.